Hi everyone, welcome back. This is the second video for week 9. In this video, we're going to introduce you to academic referencing conventions and specifically look at Harvard referencing, which is what you will use in for the rest of UOSS. Okay, so what is referencing? Referencing, simply put, is acknowledging the source of your information, and it's doing so using certain conventions. So why do we reference? We reference to acknowledge the contribution that other writers have made to our work. We reference to support our arguments with the authoritative voices of other authors, so the experts in that particular area. We also reference to demonstrate our knowledge of and familiarity with a topic that we've researched. This is you showing the reader that you actually understand and are familiar with this topic. You're also helping the readers of your work to find the original source of information or ideas that you have used, so that they can also go to that original information if they wish. And you're also avoiding plagiarism by giving credit to the original source of an idea, piece of information, or a resource. So we'll talk a little bit more about plagiarism in class, but obviously this is also one of the key reasons to reference. There are many different referencing systems. So these include Harvard, APA, which stands for the American Psychological Association, Oxford, Chicago, and MLA, which stands for Modern Language Association, among others. But in UOSS, Harvard will be the one that we will use. And you can see that the Harvard referencing guide is in your class notes. So there are two main aspects to Harvard referencing. And there is the in-text citation, which is an abridged reference that sits within the text, so that's within the sentence, within the paragraph, within the essay itself. And then there is also a full bibliographic listing in the list of references at the end of the document. So this is a list that contains all the bibliographic information necessary to locate the source. So as we said before, why do we reference? One of those reasons is so that other people can, can search for this text. This is where, this gives us this full information of the source. So the list of references is on a new page at the end of the essay, the end of the document that you're creating. It is arranged in alphabetical order by the first letter of the author's surname. Okay, so this is always the case. Another thing I will just mention that's very important to note here is that Harvard is actually, Harvard is the name given to this system of referencing, but the details, the very minor details with Harvard referencing can differ between universities, can differ between even schools and faculties. So it's very important to know that which one Harvard they're referring to. So in this case, when we say to use in UOSS, we're using Harvard. It's by UNSW. It's in the class notes. That referencing guide we give you is the one to use to do that. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. So here's how you would look. Of a book, for example, lookbook, how a reference of a book would look in your essay. So in the list of references, it would look like this. We have the author, FAR, F-A-R-R, and we have the initials of their first name. We have the year that the book was published, followed by a comma. We have the book title in italic font, another comma, and then we have the publisher, and then we have the place of publication, in this case, a city. Okay, so Berlin. And why do we not need to put Germany? Because pretty much everyone knows the Berlin we're talking about here. If you had, for example, a more obscure city that most people might not know, or a city that has two different, that exists in two different places, like, for example, I can't think of one right now, but, there's a city in the UK that's the same as city in the US. You might want to put the country afterwards, but in most cases the city is fine because the city is known, and we recognise that there are very few places that that really publish. Okay, so here's an example of a journal article, how we would do this in the list of references. We've got, again, the surnames, you've got the initial, their first name, you've got the year, Okay, so we're already seeing that this is the same as the book. But now we have the article title between single quotation marks, so not double but single. And what we've got here actually is that in this title, there's actually already single quotation marks in it. You'll see animals just love you as you are, and that's from the original title. So what that does in the first one is you actually have to put two. Yeah. So it's, if we look at the entire title here is Animals Just Love You As You Are, Experiencing Kinship Across the Species Barrier. That's the full title of the article. The first part here, the first part of the sentence is actually in single, and then outside of that we have another single set of quotation marks. You then have the journal title, which is Sociology, followed by the volume number, and then the issue. So vol stands for volume, number stands for the issue number. Then you've got the page field. This is the range of pages that that the journal article can be found at, and what's really important is the double P here stands for that. That's for the range of pages. It's more than one page. Then you've got what's called a DOI, which is a digital object identifier. This is like the online location, essentially, of the journal article. It's where it can be found online. And the DOI provides like a permanent location online. It's not like a URL which can change. Okay, so we've got here an example of an article from an edited collection. So what is an edited collection? An edited collection is a book with chapters or essays divided up into chapters by different authors. So it's edited by, you'll have usually an introduction written by the editors, and then you may have those same editors who have actually authored one of the essays in the collection, but then you'll have other authors throughout. And so this is done a little bit differently. Okay, we've got the author surname. This is the author of the actual essay that you are referring to in your work, whether it's also an essay or a report, whatever it is. But this is the author of the source of information that you are citing. So the essay that you have read. You've got the initial, the year as usual, and we've also got now the chapter title or their essay between single quotation mark, just like in the journal article. But then this is what's different. We've got here in, and then we've got the initial, the first name initial, followed by the editor surname. So these are the editors of the collection. So Curthoys wrote an essay for this book, which is edited by Hudson and Bolton. And the book, or what we've got here, is is more than one editor. You would just put, for example, if Bolton was the only editor of this book, it would just be ED with a full stop. Then we've got the title of the collection. So not the essay, but the collection, and this is in italic font. Then we've got, again, like we did for the first one, we've got the publisher and place of publication. And then we've also got the page field, which is and now we've got that because we're referring to an essay within the book, remember? So that will be that specific essay called History and Identity. Here's just the examples that we went through next to one another. Okay, I'm now going to go through some examples of integrating evidence and referencing in a series of, in a paragraph, and using a summary, a paraphrase, and some quotations, and we'll go through some good and bad examples. Okay, so in this example here, what we've got is a summary, and I'll read out the paragraph to you first. So we've got Australian tertiary education places emphasis upon the ability to learn independently. However, finding useful approaches to learning can initially be challenging for many students. Phillips 1994 argues for a flexible, individual approach to all learning activities in the belief that students are the best judges of their own needs. Thus, students should not feel that they have to rely on rigid or prescriptive methods if they do not find them effective. The Australian education context values individuality over prescription. Okay, so in this case here, we've got, you can see there's a couple of things. One is that so we just have Phillips, not the first name, not the initials, and we also have there in the bracket just the year. Because this is a summary, and in this case it's a summary of an entire source, there is no need to put the page numbers. However, if you were summarising a section within a source, say that went over more than one page, or was, say, just one page you were summarising, you would definitely want to include those. You need to include those page numbers. So in that case, it's just, if it's the entire source, you don't need the page number. But if it's anything less than that, essentially you do. You need the page range then. So in this, so this is a kind of a good example of a summary, and you can see also that we've got the name within the sentence, and when you do that, so Phillips argues, say, for example, rather than just making the point and then having Phillips at the end within the bracket. And what the difference is here is that when you do that, you kind of give a bit more authoritative weight to Phillips as well by actually introducing the name into the sentence. We'll see an example of when you don't do that next, and maybe you can compare that. So now I'll show you an example of a paraphrase. The paragraph goes, Australian tertiary education usually features lectures as a form of teaching, so students are required to develop listening note-taking skills. In order to take effective lecture notes, it is important for students to choose the note-taking techniques that best suits their individual needs. This allows students to focus on listening rather than on whether they are using a particular note-taking method correctly. Ultimately, creating a useful set of study notes is the more critical issue. So here we have, there's a couple of things to note. One, it's a specific point. It's coming from page 10. So in the in-text citation, it's got Phillips 1994, and it's also got the page number. The second thing to note is that Phillips is not introduced within the sentence, not referred to within the sentence, but instead in the in-text citation, in the brackets. And what you can probably see compared to the previous example here is the author is less prominent. They have less of an authoritative voice in this. It's more the information itself that you're noting. So Phillips is less. Yeah, he's less has less significance or less kind of weight in this paragraph. It's not his argument that you're drawing attention to so much as just a bit of information from his source. Okay, so here we've got an example of a quotation, and one that is working well. So the paragraph goes, Australian tertiary education places emphasis upon students' ability to learn independently and develop skills to help them do so. However, acquiring such skills is often achieved through a process of elimination. According to Phillips, if a method is not helpful for some reason, another should be tried until the student finds one that suits his or her own style of learning, 1994, page 10. Thus, students should strive to find the methods that best suits their need, rather than rely on rigid approaches. The Australian educational context values individuality over prescription. So there's a couple of things here you can note. One is that the quotation is indented, and so it's separate from the rest of the paragraph. And that's when a quotation goes over 3 lines. I think this has been slightly distorted because it's in a PowerPoint, but if it were in an actual text, the idea is that it goes to 3 lines, so that's why it's been indented. The other thing you'll notice here is that, again, we have a page number, so because it's from a quotation, always should have a page number. It has no quotation marks, and so unlike a quotation when it's within the text itself, always has a quotation marks. Here it doesn't, because it's indented. So when it's long enough that it's indented, you don't need quotation marks. And you can also see here that why is it a good example? It fits grammatically within the sentence. According to Phillips, if a method is not helpful, blah, blah, blah. It also is elaborated upon. Thus, students should strive to find, yada, yada. So it's kind of integrated well. It's introduced, it's formatted correctly, the conventions are right, and then it's also elaborated upon. Okay, so moving on now to a bad example of using a quotation. In this case, why it's bad is because it's floating. And so we said to avoid these, and here's an example of that. So the paragraph goes, Australian tertiary education places emphasis upon students' ability to learn independently. Time management is a cardinal study skill. Phillips, 1994, page 10. However, students also must find the methods or tools that best suit their needs, rather than relying on rigid approaches. This approach is in line with the Australian educational context that values individuality over prescription. Okay, so nothing here to introduce the quotation, and so it's not engaged with. It kind of appears somewhat disconnected, and the meaning of the entire paragraph is a little less clear because of that. So we'll just have a look at a better version of this to give you an idea of what can be done to strengthen it. Okay, so instead of this, what we've got here in the red is the text we've added. We've got, given this, as Philip points out. So we've got an introduction now to the quote. The quote's no longer floating. And we've got an elaboration on it. And students need to develop strategies to help them schedule study effectively. We've also got at the end a transition signal in addition to independence. So in addition to the transition signal, independence is, kind of linking now this new bit of information at the bottom, which is the Australian educational context values individuality over prescription, to the topic of this whole paragraph, which was introduced at the beginning as the ability to study independently. So this is the topic, and now we're linking back to it. So overall, this paragraph reads a lot stronger, and it's a lot clearer, the relationship between the research and the point that the student is trying to make. Okay, so at the very end, what I've got here is some information about how to cite material from an author who attributes it to another source. So as an example, you might be reading Carter, and in Carter's text, Carter refers to John Smith or something. And, it's not actually Carter's point that you want to cite so much, or to reference so much as it is John Smith that Carter references. So how do you do that? So what you do is you actually have to acknowledge both sources. So in the paragraph, in the in-text citation here, so the point we've got that's taken from the research is, given this, students need to develop strategies to help them schedule study effectively. Now, in this point, it's Phillips actually this point is made by, but it's Phillips that you have seen in the text by Gibbs. So you've been reading Gibbs 2001, and you come across this, citation of Phillips' point that you like, and that you've paraphrased here. You put in your own words. And so what you're doing is you're referencing both of them. You're acknowledging this is Phillips' point, but that it was cited, that is, you saw it in Gibbs. So in the list of references, what you do is you actually put Gibbs, not Phillips. And that's because you didn't read Phillips. You saw Phillips' idea and their point referenced in another source. And so you only put in the list of references what you have actually read. In this case, Gibbs. Okay, so that video, we've gone over, we've introduced to you really referencing and Harvard referencing, which we'll use, and some tips around, some samples around integrating summaries, integrating research into your work. And in the next video, we'll look at reporting verbs.